In this video, we are going to learn how to solve an equation using the quadratic formula. And so we always try to factor first when we have a quadratic like this. And the problem is I can break apart x squared as x times x. But when I try to find factors of 20 that would add up to 6, my possibilities are a combination of 1 and 20, 2 and 10, or 4 and 5. And none of those possibilities could produce a 6, so we would say this does not factor. And anytime a quadratic does not factor and you're trying to solve it, then you have to use the quadratic formula to solve it. And so you've got to memorize this formula. So to find your x, you're going to take the opposite of b, and then plus or minus the square root. And then under the square root, you're going to have a b squared minus a 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. And so the values for your a, b, and c come from the following. A is always in front of your squared term, b is always in front of your x term, and c is always your constant. So if I take a look at my particular example up here, notice that in this case, if I start with my b value is negative 6. So I'm going to have to take the opposite of negative 6 plus or minus the square root, and then I have to take the negative 6 and square it. All right, then we say minus 4 times. When I look up here, my a value is understood to be a 1 because there's nothing in front of that squared term. And then my c value is a positive 20. And then that whole thing is divided by 2 times my a value, which was positive 1. So now I will go back and simplify. A negative 6 turns into a positive 6. And then we have our plus or minus the square root. A negative 6 squared would be 36. And then when I say minus, 4 times 1 times 20 is 80. And then the whole thing is divided by 2 times 1 is 2. So as I continue simplifying, because they asked me to identify all solutions, that means both real and imaginary, if that's what it is. And what you notice is going to happen is when I take 36 minus 80, I'm going to be left with a negative number under this square root. So I'm left with a negative 44. And then I still have the 2 on the bottom. Now at this point, you have to know that the definition of the imaginary number I is the square root of negative 1. So you have to know that definition. And what I'm going to do with what I've got at this point is I'm going to break it apart so I can simplify. So on the negative 44, I'm going to think of it as a factor of negative 1 times positive 4 times 11, and then all divided by 2. So now when I come back and simplify, the square root of the negative 1 is going to give me an I outside of the radical. The square root of the 4 will give me a 2 outside of the radical. And you still have an 11 underneath. And then we still have a factor of 2 on the bottom. Now, if you notice, all of my coefficients here, I've got a 6, a 2, and a 2. They're all divisible by 2, so I can reduce them all. Or if you want, you can break apart the fractions so that you can see a little bit better how they reduce. So 6 over 2 plus or minus, and then you have the 2i square roots of 11 over 2. And so my final answer in this case, once I simplify, I'm going to get a 3 plus or minus, and then the 2's are going to cancel, so I just get the I, and it is multiplied by the square root of 11. So 2 separate answers there as solutions.